It's already inside the walls. I can hear it. The sifting. The same rhythm as before. Only now it's coming from inside. From the wood of the house itself. From the plaster and the limestone behind it. I want to be very clear about this. I am not frightened easily. I have spent 40 years with the dead. I know the difference between what is and what cannot be. And I am telling you, whatever this mountain is doing, it is not finished. It has not yet found what it was looking for. I think it's looking for me. Now, you settle in. You close your eyes if you like. I'm not going to rush this. This kind of story doesn't ask to be rushed. It asks to be heard the way you'd hear rain coming, before the first drop falls, when the air just changes, and something in the back of your chest knows. This is the story of Silas Gentry, and of a place called Mirk-Water Creek, and of the things a mountain remembers when it has been very, very patient. We'll get there. We'll go slow. You rest. Silas Gentry retired from forensic archaeology in the late autumn of his 67th year. 39 field seasons, 11 published monographs, a reputation built on patience and a singular talent for reading disturbed earth, for knowing, just by looking at the lay of the soil, what had happened there, and when, and sometimes to whom. He was not a sentimental man. His colleagues would tell you that. His students, the ones who lasted more than a semester under his supervision, would tell you he was meticulous to a point that felt almost spiritual. He did not guess. He did not assume. He observed and he recorded, and he waited for the evidence to say what it had to say. When he retired, his daughter asked him what he planned to do with himself. He said, "I plan to be very quiet for a very long time." She bought him a 2-week stay at a mountain cabin as a retirement gift. She meant it kindly. She had looked at pictures online, a small clapboard structure on a limestone shelf above a creek called Mirk-Water, somewhere in the deep ridges of the southern Appalachians. Porch, wood stove, no cell service to speak of. She thought it would suit him. It would have suited him for 2 weeks. He ended up staying for 11. The drive-in was long, a logging road that had outlived the logging, packed gravel giving way to bare dirt where the canopy closed overhead. The trees here were old. Not old the way people in cities mean old, not 50 or 60 years. Old the way mountains mean it. Some of those tulip poplars had been standing before the first European foot had touched this particular valley. Their roots had grown into the limestone karst below until tree and stone had become, in some fundamental way, the same organism. He noted that. Even on the first drive in, he noted the way the roots surfaced and then dove back into the hillside, as though something below was pulling them down. The cabin sat on a natural shelf of gray limestone above the creek, maybe 30 feet above the water. The creek was narrow and dark, not dark from pollution, but dark the way old water is dark, the color of tea left too long, stained by the tannins of 1,000 years of fallen leaves and decomposing wood. It moved without sound at the center and made only the softest whisper where it eddied around rocks at the edges. Silas stood on the porch for a long time that first evening, long enough for the light to go from amber to lavender to a blue-gray that wasn't quite dark, long enough for the first few fireflies to come up from the creek bottom, drifting like slow sparks. He breathed the air. It smelled of damp limestone and wet bark and something else, something older, mineral and cold, the smell of earth that never sees the sun. He thought, this is a place that has not changed much. He did not yet understand why that was. He found the root cellar on his third day. He had been walking the perimeter of the property, the way he always did when he arrived somewhere new, methodically in widening arcs, observing. The cabin had a small outbuilding behind it, half buried in the hillside, its door made of heavy planks that had gone gray and silver with age. A simple iron latch held it shut. No lock. Inside it was cool and dark and smelled deeply of the earth that surrounded it on 3 sides. Shelves along the walls, empty mason jars, the desiccated remains of something that had once been braided, corn husks maybe, or dried herbs, hanging from a ceiling hook, a rusted tin bucket, a pile of firewood so old it had gone soft and gray, and in the back corner, on the lowest shelf, wrapped in a piece of undyed wool fabric that had been folded with care, the sieves. There were 4 of them. Each one was a shallow, circular frame, about the diameter of a dinner plate, made from bent and lashed wood. The frames were carved with small, repeated marks along the inner rim. Not decorative exactly, purposeful. The kind of marks that meant something once to someone. The mesh stretched across each frame was unusual. Not wire, not the kind of metal screen you'd expect, but something woven from very fine, very white material that Silas could not immediately identify. It was not plant fiber. It was not metal. He was not a superstitious man, but he held those sieves for a long time in the dim light of the root cellar, turning them over in his hands. The white mesh caught the light in a way that felt almost warm. He brought them inside. That night, he sat at the kitchen table and examined them under his reading lamp. The carved marks along the rims were consistent. The same sequence repeated at even intervals. He recognized the general style as consistent with certain folk protective traditions he had read about but never encountered directly. Markers meant to catch something, to filter something out. The old-timers in certain parts of these mountains called such objects, he recalled, by a name he had come across once in a paper on material folk culture. He went to his notebooks. He always traveled with his notebooks, and found the reference. Spirit sieves, used in certain traditions to separate what was settled from what was restless, to sift the living from the remnants of the living. He set the notebook down. He looked at the sieves. Then he went to bed. He slept deeply and dreamlessly, which he noted in the morning was unusual for him. He did not intend to use them. He had been taking his morning walks down to the creek bed where the limestone shelves made natural shallow pools and exposed long stretches of layered sediment. Old habit. He could not help reading the stratigraphy, the way the layers told time. Each band of color a chapter. Gray limestone, then a dark band of organic material, then the red-brown of oxidized iron, then pale clay. One morning he brought the sieves. He told himself it was curiosity, an archaeologist's reflex. He found a soft deposit of creek-bed silt near the bank, filled one of the sieves about a third full, and began to work it the way you'd work any field sieve, a slow, circular motion, letting the fine material fall through. The material that fell through was normal, fine gray silt, the occasional quartz particle catching the morning light. What remained behind was not. He had to bend close to see them at first. Small objects, irregular in shape, chalky white, about the size of apple seeds. He picked one up and held it between his thumb and forefinger. It was warm, distinctly, inexplicably warm, warmer than his own hand. And then it made a sound, not loud, not even what you would call a sound exactly, more a sensation, the way you sometimes feel music through your feet on a wooden floor before you hear it with your ears. But there was something there, a suggestion of voices, wind through a structure that no longer stood, something that might have been a name spoken once, a very long time ago, into a room that no longer existed. He set it down very carefully on the limestone shelf beside him. He picked up another one. This one was heavier, slightly larger. When he held it, he heard, felt, the sound of an axe against wood, rhythmic, patient. Early morning, he sensed, though he could not have said why. The smell of pine resin, a man's breathing, working. He set that one down too. He sat for a long time by the creek. Around him the water moved its slow, dark way over the limestone. A kingfisher landed on a branch overhead, regarded him without apparent concern, and flew away. He thought, "This is not possible." He thought, "I will need to document this very carefully." He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. He brought all 4 sieves and worked systematically along the creek bank, cataloging what he found in his notebook. Each object, he began calling them calcified memories in his notes, a term he chose carefully for its ambiguity, held something different, a sound, an impression, a fragment of something that had once been lived. He began to develop a rough taxonomy. Some were recent, decades old at most, still carrying something almost recognizable. Others were older, their impressions faded to something barely distinguishable from the background noise of the earth itself. He found one that held crying, not distress, not acute grief, but the long, quiet crying of someone who has accepted something. He held that one for a very long time. He found one that held laughter, children somewhere up the ridge running through dry leaves. He found one that held silence, perfect, intentional silence, the kind a person makes when they are listening for something they do not want to hear. He catalogued everything. He was, after all, an archaeologist. He did not interpret beyond the evidence. He simply observed and recorded and waited. He did not yet ask himself where the objects came from, or what was making them. It began on a Thursday, in the 7th week. He was reading by the wood stove. The fire burned down to coals, the cabin warm and amber lit. Outside, a light rain was moving through the valley. The kind of rain that comes in sheets so fine they barely sound like rain at all. Just a deepening of the silence. He heard the sifting, not from outside, not from the porch where he had taken to doing his evening work by lantern light in the dry weeks, from the walls. He set his book down. He sat very still. The sound was unmistakable to him. He had spent the better part of 6 weeks listening to nothing else. That dry, rhythmic passage of fine material through a mesh. Patient, unhurried. It moved slowly along the north wall, which was built directly against the limestone shelf, the cabin's back pressed to the ridge as though leaning against it. He pressed his palm flat to the plaster of the north wall. It was cold, colder than it should have been, even accounting for the stone behind it. And beneath his hand, very faint, he could feel it, a vibration, the same rhythm. He moved his hand slowly along the wall, The vibration followed. Or rather, he moved his hand to where the vibration already was. It had no source he could find. It was everywhere behind the plaster, the way sound is everywhere inside a bell that has just been struck. He went to bed. He lay awake for a long time. By the 8th week he understood, or began to understand. He went back to the creek bank with his notebooks and looked again at what he had found. He thought about the stratigraphy, the layers of time visible in the exposed sediment. He thought about the limestone karst underlying everything, the honeycombed stone, the slow dissolution of calcium by slightly acidic water, the way limestone country preserves things, holds them, releases them slowly over centuries. He thought about the sieves, about what they were designed to separate. He went back to the root cellar and stood in the dark and thought about who had left them there, and why, and whether they had known what the mountain was doing, or whether they had been part of it, whether making the sieves had been a form of cooperation. That night, he recorded his audio log, the one at the beginning of this file, the one about the sifting in the walls. He did not leave. He had thought about leaving. He had stood in the front room with his car keys in his hand and thought about it seriously, the way a man of his training thinks about a problem, without panic, without drama, with a clear inventory of what he knew and what he did not. What he knew. The mountain was old. The karst beneath this ridge was honeycombed with passages that had been forming for longer than his species had existed. The limestone remembered everything. It was its nature to remember, to receive, to slowly calcify whatever passed through it. Water, bone, sound, time. All of it eventually was the same to limestone. What he did not know, whether the mountain was aware, whether awareness was even the right word for what a mountain might do. He set the car keys back on the counter. He thought, I have spent 40 years with the dead. I have put my hands into the earth and listened to what it kept. I did not look away then. I will not look away now. He thought, if it is sifting me, if it is looking for what I carry, then I want to know what it finds. This is where the official record ends. The notes stop mid-entry. The audio logs stop mid-sentence. What can be confirmed? Silas Gentry filed no missing person report. His daughter received no calls. His car remained in the gravel pull-off beside the cabin for 4 more weeks before anyone thought to check on him. When they came, the cabin was clean. His notebooks were on the kitchen table, stacked neatly. His coffee mug was washed and upside down on the drying rack. The wood stove held cold ash. A 4 sieves were gone from the shelf where he had kept them. The north wall, the one pressed against the limestone ridge, was warm to the touch. Not hot, not alarming, just warm, the way a wall is warm when someone has been leaning against it for a long time. The investigator noted this in his report and then, apparently, thought better of noting it, because the line was crossed out. There was one more thing. In the root cellar, on the lowest shelf where the sieves had been found, there was now a single new object. Small, white, chalky, the size of an apple seed. The investigator who found it picked it up. He held it for a moment, and then put it back down, very carefully, and did not include it in his inventory. He did not write down what he heard when he held it. He told his wife that night that he was fine. She said he didn't look fine. He said he had just had a strange day at work. She asked him to describe it, and he said he didn't think he could. He said some things were hard to put into words. He said, "You know how sometimes a place just feels old? Not old like history. Old like the place was there before the word for old existed." She said yes. She knew what he meant. He said it was like that. He did not go back to the cabin. He requested a reassignment. He got one. The cabin is still there. The limestone shelf above Mirk-Water Creek. The porch where a man sat for many evenings with a lantern and a screen, sifting the mountain's slow patience through his careful hands. If you go there, and I wouldn't, but if you did, you might notice the sound, especially at night, with the fire low and the creek moving its dark way over the stone below. That dry, rhythmic sound in the walls, patient, unhurried, going through everything, one slow pass at a time, sorting the settled from the restless, deciding what to keep